Today's Toolbox Talk is on silica dust, how to control it and prevent other people from being exposed to it. As we look at the challenges with cutting concrete, breaking it up, doing some demo work in a basement or a parking lot, those types of things, silica is just a natural mineral that is grown in the Earth's crust that is a major component of concrete products and other types of construction material. Respirable means you have the ability to inhale it without even knowing it. Keeping in mind that silica is about 100 times smaller than the grain of sand. You can see in this illustration it looks like sand. It's silica. When we're using saws or sledgehammers, that breaks down even farther and creates a dust. When we saw concrete, we're cutting concrete, we're drilling through it, or we're doing demo work, it has the potential of releasing silica into the air. Here's a 2-minute video on the hazards and the health effects to silica dust.
Silica. It's one of the most common substances on Earth. It can be found in materials like sand and rock, and building products like concrete and brick. When a worker cuts, grinds, or drills materials that contain silica, dangerous crystalline silica dust is released into the air. As the worker breathes, silica crystals flow into his mouth and nose and down the air passages deep into the lungs. The tiny crystals enter the small, fragile air sacs, where oxygen is absorbed into the blood. Immune system cells, called macrophages, engulf and try to dissolve the crystals, but they are unable to. Over time, more and more crystals build up inside the macrophage cells. The macrophages carry the silica into the walls of the lung, where they die. Scar tissue forms around the dead cells and spreads as more cells die. This damage can continue even after the exposure to silica stops. Eventually, so much scar tissue forms that the lungs can no longer function. For information on how to protect yourself from silica exposure, visit worksafebc.com.
It's also important to recognize how much exposure there is when we don't mitigate it correctly. Silicosis, it's an uncurable lung disease that causes scarring, shortness of breath, fatigue, and potentially death, as well as lung cancer. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, making it difficult to breathe, kind of like a chronic bronchitis, leads to wheezing, coughing, and additional sorts of breathing difficulties. It can also lead into kidney disease as well, and so it should be something we take very serious. When we're cutting concrete in basements, it's one of the highest risk of activities for silica exposure because of poor ventilation. Just because we see the cloud of silica dust disappear, it doesn't mean that the dust has gone away. And so it's important to remember, we'll talk about some PPE here in just a minute, but it's important to remember to keep yourself protected throughout the project. Being in a basement, it limits airflow specifically. It increases the chance of inhalation for you and your coworkers. Cutting concrete driveways, while it is in an open air environment, that wind can carry that dust for a while. It can contaminate somebody who's 100 yards away, those types of things. It is a public concern, and understanding that cutting concrete dry, it amplifies the risk. It amplifies the exposure amounts. And in both cases, whether you're cutting in a basement or in a driveway, it can release massive amounts of silica dust. It's important to be able to apply water continuously through the instrument that you're using to break it up or to cut the concrete. When, as a field supervisor, you're selling a job that you know that the excavation team is going to need to cut concrete or break it up, make sure we're including that in the pre-dig meeting to be able to allow the excavator time to rent the porter saw, make sure they're getting a hose to it. And if you're the competent person and you're delegating somebody to pick up the porter saw, you want to also remind them to grab a hose if you don't have one in the truck or if one's not going to be available on that job site. It is always much more professional to bring our own stuff to the customer's job site. Adding water reduces silica dust by 80 to 90%. This is by far the best way to control the hazard of silica exposure. If you look halfway down this list on what is called the hierarchy of controls, specifically for silica dust, you see halfway down is engineering controls. This is where water comes in. This is the most effective means for controlling the exposure for silica dust. Then you go all the way to the bottom is where we're at right now. Personal protective equipment. It's always the last line of defense. It never should replace engineering controls by introducing water to this mix. PPE is always the last line of defense. When we're cutting concrete, we need to wear this example of this mask here. An N95, it's a face mask. It's going to protect us from breathing in that silica dust. Even with the introduction of water, you still want to wear the mask. This is where you switch from safety glasses to safety goggles to prevent silica dust getting into your eyes, especially if you're outside. That wind can change things around and move that silica dust from behind the glasses and give you an exposure there to wearing those goggles is going to help with uh, dust irritation. Also, making sure you're wearing boots and gloves, depending on your exposure level. If I'm working in a basement, I definitely want to wear a Tyvek suit while breaking up concrete because if you don't, that dust is going to collect on your clothes. You're going to put it in your truck. Let's say you go home and you're changing your clothes. All of those different levels of contamination uh, go right along with you throughout your travels. So it's important to be able to limit the exposure, and the Tyvek suit is the way to go. It doesn't have to be Tyvek by brand, but you want a suit to cover your clothes. Making sure you're exercising the best hygiene practices possible. Wash your hands, wash your face before eating lunch, before you're done getting into the car. I carry a 2-gallon water container with me, small container of Palmolive soap, and usually at least a roll of paper towels to be able to decontaminate before I get into my company vehicle. It's also important to be able to understand the direction that the wind is blowing and parking your equipment, specifically your truck, upwind from that. So while we're cutting that little bit of silica that gets up into the air because we're using water, which controls 80 to 90% of the dust, we're using personal protective equipment. We would just want to avoid any kind of dust from getting into our vehicles when we're taking our PPE off. Silica dust is extremely dangerous. We want you to be safe out there. That's today's Toolbox Talk. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to reach out to me. We want to be a help to you.